Everyone saw Lewis Hamilton step into the Ferrari SF-26 today. What you didn't see is what this car quietly reveals about the war Ferrari is preparing for. From the outside, it's tradition, red paint, white engine cover, tifosi behind the barriers at FERRARI. But under that carbon fiber shell lies a power unit built deliberately to challenge Mercedes and Red Bull, not on performance, but on legality. Because Ferrari's new engine doesn't push the limit, it avoids it entirely. And that may be either their greatest strength or a catastrophic mistake. Lewis Hamilton didn't just drive a car today. He helped Ferrari send a message, one that no one at Mercedes wants to hear. But there's something deeper that wasn't in the broadcast, wasn't in the renders, and hasn't been translated until now. Because the real Ferrari strategy for 2026, the one designed around Hamilton's arrival, isn't about speed. It's about control. On January 23rd, Ferrari did something that most teams in modern F1 are afraid to do. They brought emotion back to the center of a car launch. While others chose renders, studio shoots, or cold digital streams, Ferrari went back to Maranello. And then, almost defiantly, they rolled the SF-26 out at FERRARI, under gray skies, in front of hundreds of tifosi, who had been waiting behind the fences since before sunrise. It wasn't just a reveal. It was a performance. The car itself? At first glance, familiar. Rosso Scuderia, sharper than last year. A reintroduction of white paint on the engine cover and cockpit. A callback to the legendary 312T of the 1970s. But everything else? Completely different. Lewis Hamilton drove the first installation laps. 3 circuits, slow pace, demo tires, all by the book. But symbolically, it mattered. Because this was no longer a Mercedes driver stepping into enemy territory. This was a 7-time world champion physically inaugurating what could be Ferrari's boldest project in over a decade. Charles Leclerc followed. But the moment belonged to Hamilton. The team gave him the first touch, the first data, the first image. And they knew exactly what they were doing. What was revealed today, in front of the cameras, was a new Ferrari. New chassis, new suspension, new engine, new philosophy. But most of all, a new willingness to bet everything on a clean sheet. They didn't bring upgrades from 2025. They didn't evolve what failed. They threw it out. The SF-26 isn't a successor. It's a statement. And underneath all the celebration, all the nostalgia and flags and emotion, there's a silence about something much more critical. Because Ferrari may have chosen not to chase Mercedes' loophole, but they're not playing safe. They're playing long. There's something very specific Ferrari didn't show during the SF-26 launch. And it wasn't an accident. They didn't open the engine cover. Not once. They didn't release any official CAD renders of the power unit. They didn't publish any telemetry data from Hamilton's laps, not even basic throttle traces. At first, that might seem normal. But in the context of what's happening with Mercedes and the compression loophole, that silence becomes more suspicious. According to sources close to the power unit department at Maranello, Ferrari's engine, the 676 EVO, is one of the most conservative designs ever submitted for homologation. It uses a fixed combustion chamber. No thermal expansion. No variable geometry. No interpretation of heat-dependent compression like Mercedes is alleged to be using. And here's where things get uncomfortable. Because internally, Ferrari knows they've left power on the table. They've built a clean engine, one that passes every test, cold or hot. But in doing so, they've sacrificed potential torque and possibly race day performance. The logic behind the move is strategic. They believe Mercedes will be forced into a regulatory rollback. That the FIA, once cornered, will tighten the language around thermal behavior and punish anyone who tried to exploit the gap. Ferrari wants to be on the right side of that line. But that decision, while politically smart, may cost them on track. Especially in the early rounds. Especially if the FIA does nothing. And that's the risk. That Ferrari has built the engine they think the FIA will demand. Not the one that can actually win races in March. This wouldn't be the first time Ferrari made a bet like this. In 2019, they pushed the limits of fuel flow sensors. And the FIA responded not with a penalty, but with a secret agreement that was never fully explained. After that, Ferrari's engine performance collapsed. The team never officially admitted wrongdoing. But the message was clear. The gray area had closed, and they were on the wrong side of it. Now, in 2026, it looks like they're trying to avoid that mistake. By staying well inside the lines. By building an engine that doesn't need to be defended. But here's the problem with playing clean in Formula 1. It only works if the FIA enforces the rules equally. And so far, they haven't. Mercedes RA126H, the engine allegedly using a temperature-based compression exploit, is still cleared to race. The FIA hasn't issued a technical directive. No mid-season ban. No clarification. And Ferrari knows this. So while their engine might be perfectly legal, it might also be outclassed. Because the gray area, the space between what the rules say and what teams build, has always been where championships are won. Not in the courtroom. Not in the press conference. But on track, when a car finds performance the rulebook didn't account for. Ferrari may have built a car that survives a protest, but that doesn't mean it wins the race. The engine design is part of the story. But the real pressure on the FIA is wearing red overalls. Lewis Hamilton didn't just leave Mercedes. He aligned himself with a project that's been rebuilt from the ground up. And his decision to debut in the SF-26 before the season, before official testing, wasn't just symbolic. It was calculated. Hamilton brings something no other driver on the grid has: leverage. If the FIA tries to rewrite engine parameters mid-season, they won't just be confronting Ferrari. They'll be confronting a global figurehead with 7 world titles, who's already hinted, more than once, that fairness in Formula One has never been perfectly enforced. This puts the FIA in an impossible position, because if they validate Mercedes' trick, they risk alienating one of the most influential drivers in the sport's history. But if they overcorrect, if they suddenly clamp down on thermal behavior, and restrict designs that passed scrutineering months ago, they'll be accused of protecting Hamilton's new team, of rigging the balance for Ferrari. And that's what really worries them. Not just the engines, not just the rules, but the optics. Because now, whatever the FIA does, whether they act or stay silent, they're walking into a political storm. And Lewis Hamilton is right at the center of it. If Ferrari's engine truly is as conservative as insiders claim, they could find themselves exposed in the early flyaway rounds. Bahrain, Jeddah, Australia. These tracks reward torque, throttle response, and deployment flexibility. And Mercedes may have the advantage in all three. Ferrari, on the other hand, will be relying on consistency and waiting for the FIA to act. But if that reaction takes too long, the championship points gap could become irreversible by the time Europe arrives. And then there's the other problem, the one that's quietly forming inside the team itself. Leclerc has never beaten Hamilton over a full season. He's fast, loyal, and deeply connected to Maranello, but he knows how this sport works. If the SF-26 can't compete with Mercedes, and the FIA refuses to close the loophole, Hamilton's arrival could tip the balance of power inside Ferrari. Not politically, but technically. Because if Leclerc starts demanding changes, more aggressive combustion modeling, riskier aero concepts, shortcuts Ferrari explicitly tried to avoid this year, then the team will be forced to choose: stick to the clean plan, or pivot mid-season and risk everything. Either way, the consequences are already in motion. Ferrari might have built the most compliant car on the grid, but compliance doesn't score points. And in a season where power unit performance is locked early, every lap they spend waiting for a directive from the FIA is a lap Mercedes spends pulling away. So now we wait. Ferrari has made their move. Not with headlines, but with restraint. They've chosen compliance, tradition, and long-term trust in the FIA. But in Formula One, that's not always rewarded. Because as of today, Mercedes still has the most controversial engine on the grid. And the FIA still hasn't issued a single clarification. And every day that passes, every lap Mercedes runs without penalty, only makes Ferrari's choice look riskier. There's talk behind the scenes that Ferrari might file a formal protest if Mercedes wins the first few races. That Hamilton himself has already been shown undisclosed development pathways. That could radically change the SF-26 layout if the team decides to abandon their clean sheet philosophy. But doing that mid-season would mean admitting their bet failed. And it would turn the 2026 campaign into something far more volatile. Because then the question becomes, how far is Ferrari willing to go to chase down an engine they refuse to copy? And how long can Hamilton wait before his patience starts to look like compromise? The real story here may not be about combustion ratios or power units. It may be about whether the FIA can still manage a championship where 3 manufacturers are building for speed and 1 is building for justice. If Mercedes keeps their advantage and Ferrari stays silent, then the next controversy won't come from the engine bay. It'll come from Hamilton, when he realizes that Formula One still doesn't reward those who play by the rules.